And here we are. Hopefully that's helped you land into this practice a little bit more present, a little bit more relaxed. So the first thing that I wanted to share with you, and as there are a couple more people here, awesome, Ronan and Aman, thank you so much for joining. Again, I just want to talk a little bit about your setup. So in addition to making sure when you're practicing meditation that you're comfortable as you maintain either an upright posture for breath and focus, or a recline posture, but ideally not in bed because that's gonna probably make you sleepy. But lying on your back for meditation is totally a good way to do it. You can use a bolster or a rolled up towel under your legs, and then lying on a yoga mat, maybe with the pillow under your head, is a good option. And making sure you have water handy is a good thing as well. But probably the most important thing is making sure you're in a quiet space where you won't be interrupted for the duration of your practice. Now, some people go to the extent of setting up a breath and meditation space that's one spot in their house that they use every time, and that becomes a habit. And they know every time they're there, the nervous system and focus just goes right to that attentive place. You certainly don't have to be fancy about it. You can just sit on a towel like I'm doing. So the next thing that I wanted to share with you is a little bit about the history of breath practice from my training and my perspective, which is the practice of yoga. So yoga is thousands of years old. It originated in Rishikesh, India, in the north of India. And initially what the practice was meant to do was to prepare the body for deep meditation. So in the West, there's been this complication around yoga and an emphasis on the physical practice, what we call asana or the yoga postures. It's a little bit like an athletic practice here in the West, but in the East, when I went to India to learn yoga from that source, it's not at all about the physical practice. In fact, in the original texts on yoga, there was only one pose, and that was a seated cross-legged position called lotus pose. And from there, that foundation, all the rest of yoga practices were a ladder, a sequence of practices that worked their way up to a state called Samadhi, a state of complete meditative focus. So after the meditative asana or the yoga poses, the next thing on that ladder is breath work called pranayam. And then after pranayam, you have turning your attention inwards, and then a three-part series of meditative practices. That's pratyahara, and then the three parts of meditation, dharana and dhyana and samadhi. Now, we don't need to go deep into the history of yoga, but I do want to explain what the goal of breath practice is. It's twofold. We're going to talk about this more when we talk about the specifics of breath practice, but you could think about your autonomic nervous system like a dial. On one side, you have fight or flight. On the other side, you have rest and digest. And if you can imagine toggling that dial between the two, either dialing up to that high adrenaline state, fight or flight, when you have to do something really aggressive, really high intensity, high energy, or let's say you're really maybe over anxious, you've got too much energy, being able to dial down into rest and digest, the parasympathetic nervous system response. Basically, this is what breath practice is designed to do. It's a practice to train you in how to adjust that dial, either up or down. Then meditation practice from the yogic perspective is basically a way of learning how to focus your attention where you want it to be. Very simply put, really, that's all it is. And again, in the West, we have kind of the new age movement, and there's been a lot of appropriation of yogic meditation practices and making them um, kind of esoteric and complicated. But really, when we break it all down, what meditation practice is designed to do is to teach you how to get control of your mind and direct your attention and your focus wherever you want it to go. And that's what we're going to be learning how to do over the course of these 12 weeks. Now, where breath practice and meditation intersects with athletics is in the ability, again, to toggle that switch or that dial between fight or flight and rest and digest. Because there's a sweet spot in that spectrum where we can hit peak performance. And then on the meditative side, you probably have heard about or probably practiced visualization meditation. It's a really common practice with elite athletes and people in the elite spectrum of life all over, from the business world to the academic world, everything. Visualization is a big part of meditation. We're going to go even deeper in these 12 weeks. We're going to look at focusing our attention narrower and narrower and narrower until we trigger a state of conscious awareness called flow state. Has anyone here heard of flow state? Are you familiar with that term? Yeah? Okay, cool. Awesome. It's really popular right now. And kind of like how in the Western world, yoga has been made massively popular, and then certain parts have been focused on intensely, and other parts have been excluded. Also with flow, that is the case. So tomorrow in our webinar, the first of a 3-part series, I'm going to introduce you to the history of flow science or peak performance science. So we'll be able to survey that whole history from the 1950s to now of what peak performance science is and what we know about being able to adjust the nervous system and attention and other parts of our physiology to tap into that peak performance zone, which we commonly call flow state. Okay, so I'm so excited. I'm so excited to do this. I want to give you a little bit of an overview of the 12-week program. And I sent this in an email today along with the link to the webinar. So if you haven't checked your email yet, that is there. So for our 12 weeks, we start tonight with introduction to breath and meditation practice for athletes. And then next week, we're going to talk about how breath influences the body. We'll get deeper into the autonomic nervous system, fight or flight, and rest and digest. And I'm also going to get you to test your baseline breath practice. And we're going to compare next week's to the last, week 12's breath performance. And then week 3, we're going to cover how to meditate and how meditation influences mindset. We're also going to do a baseline test then. Then there's a 3-part series of breath practices, starting from the bottom and then working our way up through the abdomen. And along with that, there's a 3-part series of meditations that I'm going to be teaching how to observe sensations, how to observe thoughts, and how to observe judgments. And all of those things have a huge bearing on our performance as athletes. And then moving on to session number 7 on March 16th, we're going to then have everything we need to practice full 3-part yogic breath. And we're going to be getting deeper into meditation, a practice called labeling and releasing, which is really powerful, especially if you're someone who struggles with anxiety and or depression. Then after that, we go into deeper practices. There's going to be a beginner and an intermediate level for these practices. So number 8, breath for calming. and meditation for relaxation. That's going to be on a beginner level. And then the week following, again, breath for calming, meditation for relaxation, but it's going to be a little bit more advanced. And then the next two, April 6th, April 13th, it's going to be breath for energy and meditation for strength, again, at a beginner and then an intermediate level. And then we finish on April 20th with the culmination of all that knowledge and practice, working on how to maintain a breath and meditation practice throughout the course of your preparation this season, for the course of your athletic career, and for the course of your life. And we'll have our retest to compare to our baseline, which will start next week. Then with the webinars, on February 3rd, tomorrow, the topic is going to be Introduction to Concepts of History of Peak Performance Science, as well as intrinsic motivation and goal setting. And then the last webinar is Flow Cycles, Triggers of Flow, and Strengths. And, oh, sorry, no, that's number 2. And number 3 is going to be on grit, creativity, and emotional intelligence. So that is the full series program that we're going to be going through over the course of the next 12 weeks. Now, I really welcome your participation. Please, at the end of each of these sessions, I'd love to hear your questions. And at any point, if you're on mountain and you're like, okay, I'm curious, does this breath practice maybe apply in this context? Feel free to shoot me an email, because I can add all of that into these series of lessons over our 12 weeks. So the next thing that I want to suggest that everybody do, if you're not already doing it, is to start working with a training journal. Now, does anyone already work with a training journal? Yeah, maybe? Okay, so this is, it's the simplest thing in the world. It is low-hanging fruit in the world of athletic performance. Just get yourself a journal. It doesn't have to be fancy. It could even just be a stack of paper stapled together. But throughout the course of this season, jot down in your training journal every day your training, and ideally every day, a little bit of information, not just about what you did in terms of training, but other information about things like how well you slept the night before, what your diet was like that day, maybe stressors that came up in your day. Keeping a journal about all of the things that are affecting you physiologically, psychologically, and on mountain when you're training is going to be incredibly valuable, because you'll notice patterns. Now, a lot of us, because we're so focused on our training, and in particular, we tend to focus on the training on snow. And of course, that's incredibly important. That's how we get better at our sport. But if we do just that to the exclusion of paying attention to the other factors in our lives that are influencing our performance, we could miss key signs that there are important things missing in our training regimen. And 2 of the biggest, sleep and hydration. So those are 2 things I highly recommend starting to track. There are a lot of trackers that you can use on your phone. There are a ton of sleep measurement apps. There are wearable sensors as well that you can use to track sleep at a really high detailed level. And those are things that, if you're curious about that, I happen to be a massive geek when it comes to wearable sensors and tech. Those of you who were skiing with me the other day got to check out my carve readout, which was really fun. So training journal. And I encourage you, please, to, in your training journal, also keep track of this series of 12 weeks of classes in breath and meditation. Taking a moment at the end of each of these sessions just to write down a few notes about how you felt during the practices that we do throughout this series. Okay, so that done, I want to introduce a really, really important concept. It's called openness and non-judgment, two concepts actually. So when it comes to breath practice, meditation, mental training in general, there's a massive barrier that most people hit, or a massive wall that most people hit right off the bat, and it tends to derail their efforts in developing um, autonomic nervous system training, which is breath practice, and mental training, which is the meditation practice. This derailer is lack of openness, and usually the form that comes in is a fear of failure. So, what I mean by that, a resistance around being open to an experience that's new and has a potential for failure. A failure is a word that I think is also really misunderstood. I always look at failure as learning. I don't have a negative connotation. I had an amazing opportunity to meet an Olympic athlete named Chemi Alcott. Does anyone know her? She's an amazing ski racer from the UK. And she said words that I will never forget. She said, I never lose. I never fail. I win and I learn. And that's it. So, this incredible openness to experience, unencumbered, unlimited by the fear of failure, made her an incredibly powerful athlete, made her super adaptable. And some of you, if you know about Chemi Alcott, you know she had a really, really bad injury. It took her off snow for a long time, and she lost her funding. She happened to be on interview, on camera, live television, and the interviewer really insensitively told her, oh, we've just learned you've lost your funding. And she cried on live television. She talked about this in the talk she was giving, and she said, but you know what? That was another experience that helped make me stronger, because I took that hurt and that vulnerability in front of other people, and that actually made my fans reach out to me more. And that in turn helped her kind of get back on the horse and get back to skiing. So, openness, a willingness to put yourself in a situation that is new and different and possibly has a potential of not going the way that you expect, but being okay with that. And I have a feeling, just from the brief amount of time I've been able to spend with you guys, the tenacious characters that you are, that this isn't going to be a problem as much as it is with the general public. I think you guys are an incredible group of human beings, and already I've seen a lot of openness to experience and a willingness to put yourself in environments that are challenging and have a potential for not going the way you expect. So, the next part, equally and probably even more important, is non-judgment. Well, non-judgment means that you commit every time you sit down to your practice, breath work, meditation, mental training in general. And this is great also when you're experimenting on snow. Non-judgment means you're going to allow whatever happens to happen without imposing an expectation on yourself. Now, obviously, as athletes with specific goals and targets, we have expectations of ourselves, and that's totally okay. Where non-judgment, or pardon me, where judgment becomes a wall or a barrier to progress is when we have an expectation that locks us with tunnel vision on a specific course, and we're unable to pivot. We're unable to deviate from that course if all of a sudden we need to. So non-judgment is a practice. It's something we'll explore later on in this series of classes. But I want to introduce that idea to you now, right at the very beginning, because if you can cultivate this practice in your day to day life, everything you may find will go a lot smoother, just a lot easier to be someone who is on a path that's inherent with risk and challenge and uncertainty if you allow yourself to explore without judgment. So that's another thing I highly recommend. So now what I want to describe is a little bit more about the goal of breath practice and the goal of meditation as it pertains to us, to ski racers. There's a couple of things that are absolutely fascinating about breath. One, it's something that you can use to influence your state of consciousness, your state of arousal, meaning how awake and alert you are versus how tired and maybe drawn out you feel. And it also has a capacity to actually influence your health. Your immune system can be influenced by breath practice. For us as athletes, that concept of the dial, being able to tune up or tune down our autonomic nervous system is a superpower. It's an incredible thing. I'm going to give you one example. I think one of the first times I was skiing Delirium Dive, and I was going into a line called, what do we call it? The Z Traverse. So there are a couple of entrances on something called the Galaxy Ridge that are ways that you can get through the rock to get into the top of these narrow chutes, these steep, narrow chutes. And there's one called the Z Traverse, which is terrifyingly narrow. And there's a giant rock in the middle of it. Now, I have very little legs. And so as I was sidestepping down this narrow traverse, and of course it's overexposure, it's over this gnarly cheese grater of rock. And so as I'm sidestepping into it, and my tiny skis are still hanging off the back end, I get to this massive boulder in the middle. And I have to somehow step my foot over and then all the way down to the snow on the far side. And I felt like my left knee was up here and my right foot was like as far away from my body as it could possibly get. And I still couldn't quite get my foot on the ground. So there was this moment where I had to trust myself and allow myself to kind of high side. I had to allow myself to fall in order to get my foot on the ground. But I could not will myself to do it. And this was an impossible situation. There was no way up. There was no way back. There was no way forward. The only way was down. The only option was to allow myself to fall to get to that safety, the downside of that big rock. I had been practicing yoga for a short time at that point. So I had to dig really deep and actually just take a few deep breaths. And then I gave myself a 3 count, 1, 2, 3, a big exhale. And I got my foot on the ground. And my trainer's like, yeah, good job. And I was like, okay, I made it. And it was the most epic run of my life. That day in the dive changed me as a skier in a phenomenal way. But that moment of feeling incredibly stuck and terrified, you can actually, through the use of breath practice, you can bring your nervous system down to that point where you can think clearly again and take action to influence the outcome of whatever challenge you're facing. That is a superpower. And when it comes to meditation practice, a lot of athletes are doing it. Several are starting to become more vocal about it and how powerful it is for them in their training regimen. There's still a bit of a stigma, though, around that term meditation. And so I mentioned that really it can be understood in its most simple terms as being able to focus your attention where you want it to be. It cannot be overstated, though, how incredibly powerful it is once you can actually do this. Another example from a client that I've worked with in the past, um, who has had many, many years of struggling with this incredibly negative self belief, like constantly fighting this internal dialogue. It's like heartbreakingly self critical. And I worked with her for many years um, on her skiing. And of course, when you work with the same client for years, you have a lot of chairlift rides, you get to talking. And I introduced her to meditation as a way of dealing with some of this critical self talk. And she started to practice meditation just following me. She came to a few of my yoga classes and then went further. She read some books and she started practicing online. And then one day, now keeping in mind, let's see if we put this into perspective. When she started skiing with me, she was like a solid light blue skier. Like she could handle light blue groomed runs. Um, but that was pretty intense for her. And then she skied with me all the way through, being confident on like steeper black runs and bump runs. She came in the dive with me after a couple years of meditation practice. And really, she had been practicing, obviously, skiing. She'd been practicing training with me for a long time. But the transformation in her confidence level after a little bit of time, kind of a drop in the bucket, relatively speaking, of meditation practice, all of a sudden she had this incredible resilience. The negative self talk had changed, didn't go away, but it changed in that she was aware of it enough that she could choose to change her inner dialogue at will. She got in Delirium Dive. Amazing. It's one of the highlights of my teaching career, for sure. So, the purpose of meditation for us as athletes can be simplified to an analogy. So, imagine a spotlight. You have massive floodlight. So, a spotlight that's really, really broad and illuminating this really big area, a big landscape, let's say. And that's sort of your normal waking consciousness, where you have a lot of information coming into your sense organs. And then through meditation, you learn to take that normal state of waking consciousness, where your attention is being drawn to all these different stimuli, and then being able to gradually narrow that focus. You may have heard of mindful presence meditation, but being able to focus your attention in the present moment. That's kind of one aspect of narrowing, but there are many others. And the better you get at meditation, the more narrow you're able to make that beam of light. And then when you make it incredibly narrow, when you make it laser focused on the desired object of your attention, that, incidentally, is how you can trigger peak performance in your brain. That's how you can trigger a flow experience. So, yoga, kind of circling back to the history of yoga, it was a practice basically for tapping into flow, this optimal state of consciousness where you feel your best, where you perform your best. But it wasn't called that, it was called Samadhi. And in modern day, we train in yoga aiming towards that state of total meditative absorption called Samadhi. It's described in yogic texts as a state of bliss, a state of total contentment, absorption in the moment. And I'll describe that a little bit more when I talk more about flow. But that's down, I want to steer away a little bit from that world because when it comes to the science of peak performance, the history from psychological sciences, and then moving into more modern day neuroimaging, neuroscience. What flow is actually a switch that we have in the brain to deal with extreme stressful environments. It's that what I like to call the oh shit switch. Like all of a sudden you're in a moment that demands the absolute best of your ability, your top level of performance, because it's like, oh shit, I've lost a ski. I'm going really fast. I need to find a way to save this. Or many other examples of that sort of situation. Flow state, it appears from the science and the research that's been done so far, is your body's evolutionary derived way of dealing with those kinds of life events, those circumstances. So I'm really excited to talk about that too. But to sort of encapsulate everything when it comes to breath and meditation practice, it can be helpful to think of it as a series of steps on a staircase or rungs on a ladder. It's not something that, boom, you learn how to do all at once. It can take a long time to develop the skill in breathwork and in meditation practice to be able to consciously flip that switch. And that's why there's so few people who have done it. But all of the work that I've been doing in my training with the Flow Research Collective has looked at all of the other things that you can do, all the other triggers that you can access just by influencing things like diet, nutrition, lifestyle practices, mindset training. There's a whole lot of things that can be done to help you learn how to, at will, flip that switch. And that's where we're going in this 12 weeks and through our 3 webinars. So I want to pause there. I've been talking your ear off. I want to open it up. If anyone has any questions or any similar stories of things like what I experienced getting stuck on the rock in Delirium Dive, in the Z Traverse. And if you're shy to talk out loud on Zoom, you can always enter something into the chat also.
I've got a question. With
Sure.
your training journal,
Mm-hmm.
are you journaling daily, even with non-focused? So I didn't have a day of training today, but I've still skied. I've still thought about my goals. Are you still journaling that, although it hasn't been a focused day?
It doesn't have to be specific to your training. It doesn't have to be exclusive to your training, rather. To notice the patterns that might be influencing your performance, it's awesome if you can track a lot of data daily throughout the course of your season.
Yeah.
So yeah, the basics: sleep, hydration, nutrition. You may notice days where you feel like wildly out of balance, when you just can't get your mojo. If you look back at the history of like 1 or 2 months and you look at those variables, you may actually see a really obvious pattern that would be completely not available to you if you don't track it. So yeah, I highly recommend just jotting down something every day. Thank you for that. Good question. Any others? Okay, no pressure. So what I want to do to close this session then is do a mini breath and meditation session. So for breath work, the reason that we want an upright posture is we want to be able to access maximum lung volume. So being able to allow the rib cage to expand laterally, the belly to expand forward and contract back, and the freedom for the clavicle and the sternum to lift. Now, keeping in mind that that may differ for people, it may differ how your body moves given all kinds of things, how tight you are in your thoracic cavity and your core, and how much you've practiced consciously breath work will change perhaps the way that your body accesses the breath. But where we're going to start with is just normal, deep abdominal breathing. So again, for this, it can be helpful to close your eyes. You don't have to, but it helps focus your attention inward. Now we want to start our session first by just getting a baseline, observing with openness and without judgment. Where is the breath landing in your body right now? What do you notice about your breath? Do you notice that it's high in the chest, or maybe you feel it in your throat? Does the breath feel smooth and easy? There's nothing right or wrong. We just want to observe the way we're breathing right now. So a very simple breath practice is equal count inhale and exhale. And here's how it works. I'll describe it first, and then I will guide you in practice. So with whatever cadence of breath you're currently experiencing, you establish a count. So just as an example for me right now on my inhale, I estimate it's at about a 4 count. So I inhale 1, 2, 3, 4, and about there I reach the top of my inhale. And then my exhale has another count. So just for a few seconds here, observe your breath and notice what the count is for your inhale. And this will be individual for each one of you. And notice, please, also the count of your exhale. You may notice that one is shorter than the other. And so our goal for this practice will be to make the count between inhale and exhale even. Choose the longer of the two, whichever is longer, the inhale or the exhale, and match its counterpart in length. And now please start to really consciously influence the breath, making the length of the inhale the same as the length of the exhale. Now you can relax, controlling the breath. Just allow your breath to return to its normal, comfortable rhythm. We're going to segue straight into a meditation practice. In this practice, we don't need to control the mind. We don't need to make the mind quiet. The trick of meditation is just to be able to observe the projections of the mind as they happen with those critical attitudes of openness and non-judgment. You may notice thoughts or sensations, memories of things that have happened in the past. Or visions of things that you anticipate could happen in the future. Simply observe whatever is happening in your awareness right now. You may notice quite quickly the attention get drawn away and caught up in one of these projections. This is totally normal and to be expected. Your only job is to bring your awareness back to the task of observing the projections of your mind, the fluctuations of your mind, with openness and non-judgment. And again, if the mind wanders off, if your attention gets sucked into one of the things that you observe going on in your awareness, just gently bring it back to this simple task of observing what's going on in your mind right now. And just one more time, if your attention has wandered or has been hooked into one of the things you noticed happening in your awareness, just bring it back to this moment. Whatever is happening for you right now, everything is welcome. Now, come out of the meditation just by slowly opening your eyes, allowing light back in. That's good. And just moving the head a little bit. Excellent. Good job, you guys. Excellent first practice. So whatever you experienced, maybe your mind just like over and over and over again, you were like, oh, I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry. And your attention just got sucked into that. Totally normal and okay. Or maybe you found that you had an itchy foot and you're like, oh, my foot is itching. And that was a massive distraction. Talking about meditation with people, it's incredible. All the places your mind will go when you finally allow it to be quiet and to have your full attention brought to bear on whatever is going on in your awareness. Oh, it's okay. Whatever happens in meditation happens in meditation. And now we unpause so that you can enter back into your normal day-to-day and you can go do whatever you need to do for your evening. I want to thank you guys so much for sharing this practice with me today, for sharing your time, your energy, and your attention.